What happens when bureaucracy protects the fraudsters instead of the taxpayers? Letting $250 million just, well, disappear in plain sight.
It's a staggering amount of money.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we are examining a truly jaw-dropping case of, well, alleged government oversight failure. It enabled massive, massive theft. We're talking about the Feeding Our Future, or FOF, fraud scheme in Minnesota.
And the numbers here are just hard to wrap your head around. The scandal involves the alleged pilfering of $250 million.
Money that was specifically earmarked to feed hungry children.
Right. And instead, it allegedly lined the pockets of 70 indicted individuals.
Our deep dive today is built entirely around this really devastating special review that was released by the state's Office of the Legislative Auditor, the OLA.
And what's important for you to understand is that this report isn't just about the criminals. It is a systemic indictment of the state agency that was supposed to be watching the money, the Minnesota Department of Education, or MDE.
Yeah, the OLA found MDE was, and this is a quote, ill-prepared to manage these high-risk programs, and that they consistently failed to use the very enforcement powers they already had to stop the abuse.
They had the tools.
They had the tools. So our mission today is to unpack this timeline of, frankly, profound negligence. What were the warning signs MDE ignored for years? How did bureaucratic inertia let this program just explode during the pandemic?
And maybe most importantly, why a culture of regulatory avoidance is often the single greatest risk to the public funds that you, the taxpayer, entrust to the government.
What's so frustrating here, and what the OLA makes crystal clear, is that MDE's inaction is what allowed this fraud to grow to such an astronomical scale.
Exactly. This is a story about the complete breakdown of fiscal accountability, a breakdown that happened when the government, it seems, chose to prioritize paperwork over preventing outright theft.
Okay, let's unpack this. We're talking about massive federal nutrition programs.
Right, two of them specifically. The Child and Adult Care Food Program, CACFP, and the Summer Food Service Program, or SFSP.
And the goal is simple, right? They reimburse nonprofit sponsors, like Feeding Our Future, for the meals and snacks they serve to eligible low-income kids.
A very straightforward mission. But then you look at the numbers when the COVID-19 pandemic hit. Congress, they loosened monitoring requirements through federal waivers to get food out faster.
Which makes sense in an emergency.
It does, but in Minnesota, it became a financial disaster. In fiscal year 2020, MDE paid out about $70 million to these sponsors.
Okay, $70 million. And the next year...
Get this. By fiscal year 2021, MDE was distributing almost $336 million.
Wow. That's a 382% increase.
In a single year.
That kind of growth is not normal, not even during a crisis. That kind of rapid spending increase should have triggered every alarm bell. An immediate audit, a risk assessment, something.
Absolutely. And when you drill down into the report, you see exactly who was driving that explosion. It was Feeding Our Future.
The OLA tracked their numbers specifically.
Oh, yes. FOF went from being a smaller sponsor, getting about $1.4 million in fiscal year 2019, to collecting a monumental $140.3 million in fiscal year 2021.
Wait, run that by me again. 1.4 million to over 140 million.
That's right. It's a 2,818% jump.
That's not just a statistic. That's proof that the normal regulatory triggers, the things designed to flag these high-risk outliers, were either broken or just willfully ignored.
And what's really fascinating here is that the growth itself was the first and, frankly, most obvious warning sign. Think about it monthly. FOF went from getting about $61,000 a month in late 2018 to nearly $32 million in a single month, April 2021.
An 87-fold increase in a year.
Right. Any minimally competent financial oversight should have flagged that. It demanded immediate intervention. But instead, the taxpayer money just kept flowing.
And what's crucial for you to understand is that the pandemic didn't create this problem out of thin air.
No, it just poured rocket fuel on a fire that MDE had been letting smolder for years. The OLA report goes back and looks at the red flags MDE was ignoring long before the cash explosion.
As far back as 2017.
That's right. The auditors detail all these concerns MDE itself raised about FOF's annual applications. And these were not minor clerical errors, they were serious structural financial deficiencies.
The agency's own notes said FOF had inadequate financial resources, their reports didn't meet accepted accounting principles, and this is a big one, they had no dedicated accounting staff. for an organization managing millions in public funds.
And MDE explicitly recognized that. They knew that the lack of financial staff undermined physical integrity and internal controls. Based on their own rules, that should have been a non-starter.
But they approved them anyway.
They approved FOS 2021 application anyway. They just let them proceed without the required financial information. It was an institutional shrug.
And this failure to follow through, it became a pattern. MDE only did one full administrative review of FOF way back in early 2019.
And that single review was brutal. It uncovered 22 separate deficiencies.
Like what?
Things like FOF sites failing to collect basic enrollment data for the kids, wrongly inflating their attendance numbers, claiming expenses that weren't allowed. The fraud was already visible.
So based on these really severe findings, MDE stat said, okay, a follow-up review is needed. It was scheduled for late 2019.
A critical step. It was designed to make sure corrections were actually made before they got another cent.
But it never happened.
That crucial follow-up review never, ever occurred. They identified the risk, they documented the failure, scheduled the fix, and then just let it go. This is what the OLA means when they say MDE failed to use the powers it had.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, and it shows you where the priorities were, or rather where they weren't.
Right.
It gets even worse when you see how MDE handled complaints from the outside. The agency got numerous complaints about FOF, including two separate ones. One as early as June 2019, alleging that FOS required kickbacks from vendors.
Actual kickbacks. This is documented credible evidence of alleged criminal activity.
So how does a state agency respond to that?
Well, their internal procedures, which the OLA called inadequate, often directed MDE staff to share the complaint with the subject of the complaint.
You're kidding.
No. They'd send it to FOF and ask them to investigate their own alleged conduct?
That is the literal definition of asking the fox to guard the henhouse, with millions of taxpayer dollars at stake.
And MDE would probably argue they were trying to avoid litigation, but the OLA points out that they relied on child nutrition staff, people without investigative training, to handle this.
Even though the USDA specifically warned them that these programs are high risk.
Exactly. It was a choice to manage a high-risk program with low-risk procedures. It's a culture of avoiding accountability until it's way too late.
So when MBE finally did try to use their formal tool to shut a sponsor down, the Serious Deficiency Process, or SDP, how did that go?
They failed at that, too. They declared FOF seriously deficient twice in early 2021. They had them cornered legally.
Yeah.
But they ultimately deferred all serious deficiencies. They just let the process die.
Let's talk about the failures within that process, because the OLA report is just merciless here. First, the audit.
Right. The first SDP was triggered because FOF didn't even submit a required audit. When they finally did, it was, well, a mess. It was incomplete, done by an unlicensed auditor, and full of discrepancies.
Why does an unlicensed auditor matter so much for the average person listening?
Because a proper audit from a licensed professional is your guarantee of financial integrity. An unlicensed one means every number is suspect. MDE should have immediately suspended payments on that basis alone.
What if they didn't?
They paid the claims and moved on. They just missed this huge objective indicator of fraud.
And the second failure is maybe even more shocking. It's about the meal counts, the pure mathematical impossibility of it all.
Absolutely. So in April 2021, MDE briefly paused payments and asked for paperwork from 28 of FOF's sites.
And what did they find?
They found that 13 of those 28 sites claimed the exact same number of meals and snacks served every single day for the entire month. 6 or 7 days a week.
That's not possible. The odds of that happening legitimately are zero.
It's not just an irregularity, it's a clear sign of a criminal scheme. It's fabricated data. In fact, the federal indictments later cited this exact data as direct evidence of the crime.
So MDE was holding the smoking gun in their hands.
They were, and yet they paid $10.1 million for 3.8 million meals from those sites. They didn't deny the claims, they didn't adjust them, they just paid.
Which brings us to the core conflict.
Yeah.
MDE's defense versus the OLA's criticism.
MDE officials argued their hands were tied. They cited, confusion from COVID waivers, lack of clear guidance, no state investigatory power, and crucially, they cited a fear of lawsuits and bad press.
So they're blaming everyone but themselves.
Essentially, yes. They claim the responsibility for the fraud lies solely with the criminals.
That's the ultimate bureaucratic excuse. We were afraid of getting sued, so we let the theft continue.
And the OLA strongly rebutted that. The auditor said MDE could have taken more decisive action sooner. They had the opportunity. Most critically, the OLA pointed to a 2017 court decision that exposed a weakness in their rules.
And MDE did nothing to fix it.
For 4 years, they did nothing to ask the legislature to strengthen their legal authority, so they knew their rules were weak and they just kept approving applications. It's institutional decay.
So they turned the flexibility of the COVID waivers into an excuse for inaction.
Exactly. The OLA says MDE's response was limited. At one point, they paused to review because, and I'm quoting here, virtual visits were not working. It shows a complete inability to adapt.
This raises a critical question for you, the taxpayer. If the agency itself believes it can't stop known fraud, who is safeguarding the public treasury?
The OLA's conclusion is just damning. MDE's own choices transformed procedural flexibility into institutionalized, reduced oversight. The priority was paperwork, not preventing $250 million in waste, fraud, and abuse.
So you have just seen how lax government oversight, combined with a staggering 382% increase in emergency funding, created a perfect storm for brazen, documented fraud.
The report is clear. MDE was ill-prepared and failed to act on years of warnings, resulting in the alleged misappropriation of $250 million meant for children.
So what does this all mean for you? The report confirms that when government agencies, armed with mounting evidence of criminal activity, still default to bureaucratic paralysis out of fear of a lawsuit, they are actively enabling massive theft on your dime.
And the final provocative thought we want to leave you with is this. If the government is more concerned about being sued than stopping the alleged misuse of millions of dollars destined for the most vulnerable, how many other publicly funded programs right now are ripe for exploitation, placing bureaucratic self-preservation far, far ahead of accountability? Think about where that $250 million went.